But there's this element in the world where, because we're so global now, we're ideas and foods spread faster. And what we do is we take it and adopt it to innovate. So how do you balance between disrespecting tradition, losing the cultural aspects and institution elements, to balancing growth and innovation and change?
Man, that was a rough question.
Hey listeners, it's Alex, your host of EOA, Entrepreneurs of Asia, the show where we talk to founders, entrepreneurs, investors, shaping and impacting the startup scene here in Asia. Today we continue our relevant conversations and have a lot of lessons to share. We are releasing episode 14, but in the backlog we have already recorded more than 20 episodes and are producing more each week. I am trying my best to keep up as much as possible. Also in the pipeline are a few other concepts and formats for other podcasts that will be introduced seasonally in the coming months, so stay tuned. This episode features an amazing founder and F&B entrepreneur, Marcus Lau of Table and Apron and Universal Bakehouse. Marcus is a tremendous entrepreneur, and I would urge anyone working or interested in the space of entrepreneurship to learn and listen from him. Marcus presents a very thorough business philosophy and strategy that has allowed him continued success despite the struggles of entrepreneurship that came his way. In this episode, we briefly touch upon his story, discuss diversification versus specialization, how to create value with a soul, artistry and community, scaling craftsmanship, F&B as a team sport, the importance of experience for the restaurant business, finding focus early on, technology in F&B, how restaurants use data, founder conflicts, building culture, food as an institution, food accelerators and stock options for F&B businesses, and much more. This one is a long one, but I guarantee it's worth your time. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you.
What do we have here in front of me?
Well, Alex, what you have in front of you is a turkey ham and cheese brioche bun. It's kind of a roll, so we would make a big batch of brioche dough at Universal Bakehouse, and we try and come up with as many different things that you can have as a pastry good as possible.
So I'm going to do something I usually don't do and take a bite in front of you. Very nice. And this is made here in the bakery, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Which you started about a year ago?
Universal Bakehouse, yep. Started about exactly a year ago, actually. We opened on the 20th of October in 2019. So it's approximately a year now. So if you don't get the theme already, Marcus here is a F&B entrepreneur. And at this point, we've had probably quite a few already on the show. We had Chai and Zihan, who shared his fine dining experience. And then Renyi, who shared his burger joint building empire experience as well. And so Marcus here has run a restaurant originally called Kitchen Table, right? Started about 6 years ago. Yeah, 2014. That's correct.
And then eventually it changed into Table and Apron.
Yep.
And then less than a year ago, you opened a bakery right next to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was called Universal Bakehouse.
Yeah.
So we're about 6 years in right now.
Yeah. So I have to give a lot of props because in general, like people love hearing about, big, successful, big tech entrepreneurs, valuations of billions and unicorns, right? But I find it more impressive of anyone who could build a business from scratch, feed a big team of people for many, many years. And I think we learned that most companies fail within a few years of starting out, right? If you think about maybe your friends, do you know anyone that has started the journey then couldn't make it?
I think I've been very fortunate. I've been surrounded by very good friends who are in the industry and, who have very strong first principle values when it comes to going to F&B. Yeah. But it's an industry where it's a very romantic notion where, hey, my dream is to open a cafe or a restaurant and I want to go into it. And they face this unwavering dedication or commitment you need to have in order to actually, operate and run a space. And I think I've heard it somewhere before where someone said, if you really don't like someone, you can encourage them to open a restaurant. So they stuck with it for life. Yeah.
That is, life where they lose all their savings, right?
Yeah.
Which probably happens more often than not, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I wanted to continue. So before we started this, we were talking about how you were running both businesses now. From a year ago, you had two companies. And back then, this was before the pandemic, right? And you had And I remember visiting when you first opened up, gave us the tour very nicely. Huge space for bakery, big ambitions. I remember back then you mentioned, you had some ideas of having a very small front for the bakery and then, having a much bigger back to be able to have very high production capacity and thinking about B2B and all those kind of things. But it turns out, I guess things might have changed for the pandemic. And it turns out that, operating Table and Apron for 6 years, which was doing really well at probably before the pandemic. And afterwards now, I think things kind of flipped where you started this business in bakery. It kind of took off during the pandemic, I guess. And it's now supporting the restaurant instead of the other way around.
Yeah. This was a real surprise for me because, running a restaurant or opening and operating one is as much a marathon than a sprint.
Yeah.
And which each iteration that we go through with the restaurant, we become more restaurant specialists.
Yeah.
We were looking at restaurant sites elsewhere when we were talking about expansion. And it just so happened that Universal Bakehouse, which originally was called Universal Doby or Laundry.
Laundry, yeah.
Which was servicing all our aprons, all our linens from the restaurant. The lady who owned the business retired after 40 years in business. And we decided that maybe we were forced to consider it because the landlord asked us, would you like to consider the space?
Is it the same landlord as Table and Apron?
No, it was
different landlord. So you just
different.
More of a community driven thing, right?
Yes.
You just know each other and you went there for her business. So then she just kind of asked you.
Precisely.
Okay.
We were hesitant at first. We had no idea what we wanted to do with it.
Pretty big space, right?
Yeah, it's the same size as Table and Apron actually.
Roughly how big is that in square feet?
You're talking about 1,800 square feet. The most natural thing that will occur to you is that if you're running a business that you think is successful 5-6 years down the line, I mean, that's the natural saying that goes, why break something why fix something that's not broken?
Yeah.
And that was the natural occurring thought to me, was that we'll just knock down the space, open another restaurant. Why not? Or expand Table and Apron, if anything.
Okay, yeah. So you could have expanded it or opened another concept. Would it have been weird right next to each other, though, if it was another concept?
Yeah, so that was one of the things we thought that we would be cannibalizing our concept if we open anything too similar to a full-service restaurant, which Damansara Kim, this great neighborhood, has become a foodie street right now. It's filled with restaurants. And we didn't want to be just cannibalizing the community of businesses here, but really enhancing it. So naturally, it would just be knocking the space down and just opening more seating for our guests because, I mean, we get a lot of reservations in.
That makes sense, actually. Continuing, expanding the base if there's... But I guess the consideration would be, was there enough demand to kind of do that?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've had, fortunately, in the 6 years building up to where we are now, we do have that demand. And I think that there's something also quite special about making sure that you're still known as that neighborhood restaurant.
Yeah.
You're not like 5 minutes away, you can go to just down the road and there's a Table and Apron over there. And then over here, there's another Table and Apron over here. So we like keeping that kind of emotive experience when visiting our own brands.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of appreciate that, but I also kind of lament that because... So I stay, for people who don't know anything about Malaysia or Kuala Lumpur or KL, I stay in Bangsar, which is about 10-15 minutes down the road, no traffic. People tend to think, Bangsar is this place to go drinking and having fun and a lot of expats, but it's not really a food place.
No.
Right? Think about the places you would go there to eat. Not really, right? And so I don't have that community place I can go to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like small bars and stuff, but I'm not going to be drinking every single day and getting old, right? So, and, it's kind of like that feel in Europe, that community butcher, that community bakery, that community, and it's just extremely high quality craftsmanship of great baked goods. And then you see the same people going there for a few decades, right? And I guess because of the nature of Kuala Lumpur, it's kind of spaced out. And at least for me in my area, I don't have that. So
yeah.
Opening
a place in Malaysia or in the Klang Valley at least it's a very interesting dynamic because like you say, Bangsa is only 10 minutes away, but the rent rates are completely different.
Insane. Yeah.
And unlike in metropolitan cities like London or Singapore, where in the CBD itself, you'd have millions, just very high density.
Very high dense. Yeah.
In Klang Valley, that's not really the case. So you're very much reliant on the community that's there. For a bit of background about us is that we're an independent restaurant in the sense that everything we own, the brick and mortar place, everything that's invested in it was solely from building our capital from scratch rather than having investors come in. So because we are not as cash rich, we have to be very deliberate in the choices we make in terms of locations. Bangsa was one that was the case where if your sales didn't meet the kind of expectation that you had, and you get swamped by your overheads, and you probably won't.
Let's talk some numbers. Like what would be like a floor rental, ground space, retail?
If you're talking about the Talawi area, you're looking at about 20K.
20K
on average.
And I guess a convert that's roughly about 5,000 plus USD. I think around there. Yeah. And then it's just for a small space, probably.
Correct. And not very high dense. It's not like you're in New York.
Correct. Yeah. So, and I guess it'd be a very questionable, business exercise to think about your product and like the type of foot traffic there, if it would even make sense, right? So there's definitely a lot of high risk, especially if you're not coming from a cash rich business, right?
Correct.
And I think what happens is a lot of guys who are cash rich probably will go there and then probably close within 1 or 2 years, which is where we see high turnover a lot, right?
Yeah. To find a place in Bangsa that's been around for some time, and you only find that there's a few that have been there for quite a number of years.
Yeah.
But going back to this space, so Universal Bakehouse, which is currently next door to Table and Apron, when we initially thought of opening a restaurant just next door, and one of my managing partners, so there's two partners in the business. I'm the founder of the restaurant, and we have another managing partner who joined us, Asia. I think you met her.
Yes, I met her just now. Yeah.
So she's more on the operations level, and she joined us as an intern and worked her way up.
Oh, very nice. And became a partner.
Yeah. So I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. There's hope for people starting from the very bottom, right?
Yeah. I think that's something, in F&B especially, the opportunity for that is abound, right? And so she was the one who said, well, we've already been making sourdough breads for the last...
so this was actually her idea.
Yeah. She's like, why don't we do a bakery? Yeah. And I had thought about it for a while, and obviously in my head, being more of on the entrepreneurial, the business side, I'd go, well, actually, but we're restaurant specialists. Wouldn't we be stretching our team? Yeah. Right. But I knew that our sourdough breads have been clearing the shelves when we place it there on a daily basis.
I'm not even that. I remember when I went to Kitchen Table to Table and Apron later on, first thing I would order as appetizer would be the bread, right? It was always a very good experience. And at least back then, not too many people were doing very good sour bread. I mean, it seems to be kind of the craze these days, right? Like everywhere you go, you probably can get a good sourdough bread, but not everyone does it that well though, probably. Yeah. It was a good product. Made sense.
I think it was also because of global phenomenon. Sourdough breads in the past 5-6 years, a lot of bakers have been turning towards different methods of preparing it. Very much a very San Francisco style, where they pull the fermentation really long. They lower the acidity down. They make the breads a lot more palatable. And just coincidentally, Asians love breads that are on the softer side, right? These sourdough breads were a good match for it, because you'd have that really crispy edges.
But then very soft on the inside.
And that was really just a matter of, as a baker, really understanding how to pull your fermentation and work that bread dough out. So, we were very familiar with the opportunity that was at hand. But because we weren't specialists in it, we weren't sure whether this was something to dive deep into as well.
I'm going to pull in another tangent really quickly before we go back again. Where is this resurgence of, this artisanal movement, I guess you could say, of bread again? Like, what is this? Why did it spread from I don't know, is it from America to outwards or other countries outwards? Like, where's this experimentation and why are people adopting it and why is it spreading?
Right. So if you want to look at it from a really big picture, and this is for me to put on a baker's mindset right now.
Yes.
Sourdough breads, or traditional like European style breads, have always been known to be
correct
made in Europe. You know, that's where you go. You go France for breads, right?
Very, very traditional, very proper, a certain way, right?
And then in the Americas, or in the US at least, in the 1990s, I think, you know, you had a few great bakers who started saying, hey, look, here's us trying to take what we've already known from the French and try and work it in different ways. And
it's such an American thing to do.
Correct. And if there's any way I can draw parallels, it's from wine.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah.
You know, Europe being the mecca of wine,
old world wines,
and then, you know, the new world start taking it apart and saying, okay, let's try and understand this better. And it's not so much that one is better than the other. It is just a matter of taking something that has been tradition and making it relevant again, in a contemporary context. So there's 2 years, and I don't think, you know, the way that the breads are made today just started off overnight, right? It was really just something has changed over the years, and a lot of passion bakers have said, okay, this is the kind of thing we want to move into. And funnily enough, because of the MCO or the lockdown, people are eating more at home. And because with the extent of social media having an impact and influence, now you get people saying, hey, I want to make sourdough breads at home as well. So that has accelerated the appreciation of sourdough breads.
Interesting. So people always talk about how the pandemic accelerated trends, and they're always talking about remote work. They're talking about online tools, old people catching up finally. But what you're telling me is in the F&B world and entrepreneurs who are facing this, that it had helped accelerate a food trend actually.
I mean, like when you talk about eating or cooking, they're very tactile experiences, correct? So when you look at it during the MCO, yes, you're right. You know, we have Zoom calls, we have Zoom meetings. Humans are instinctively tribal and social beings. And if they're at home, you know, it's their way to get, you know, feel that tactile experience. It goes back to cooking. And I think it was very natural that people go, we'll just make breads. Yeah,
I mean, okay, you're pointing out a very good trend, right? Like the fact that I started a podcast and a million other people as well, just by being home and looking for experiences. Like you could drown yourself in Netflix only for X amount of time before you go crazy, unless, you know, people are maybe perhaps depressed or have other issues. But like, if not, you're going to be looking for other experiences.
Correct.
People started cooking again. A lot of my friends who only went out started cooking again. Like you said, they're looking for those things. And I think, looking from an entrepreneurial standpoint or looking for opportunities, this is an area you could see how that trend, what's permanent, what's changed, and kind of beyond the technological aspects too. Like it's a lifestyle kind of aspect that changed, I guess, fundamentally, and behavioral shifted from that, from ordering the foods or cooking or all these kind of things.
Yeah. So that was something we really observed during the lockdown, was that after opening the bakery for just over a year right now, you're starting to see that demand pick up because there's that appreciation. Whereas 6 years ago when we just had a restaurant, and at the time we were known as the kitchen table, the first thing people would ask is, what's sourdough bread? Why is it sour?
Really? So you had to educate people on what actually sourdough bread is.
Yeah, especially in our community here in Damansara Kim and PJ, where we were probably the second Western fusion restaurant that came here, because just down the road from us is Euro Deli that prior to us being here was 20 years old. Yeah. And they were from, a blast in the past kind of place. Yeah. So when we have something like sourdough breads, when you're generally accustomed to dinner rolls, soft potato buns, Japanese bread, that was at least quite foreign 6 years ago. Yeah. And to think that now when we open Universal Bakehouse and specializing in, a lot of classic baked goods and also with sourdough breads, people don't come in and ask, oh, what's sourdough bread?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there's probably 1 out of 100 that will ask that right now.
True. And I guess it also, so it feels like there's convergence of multiple trends, and the timing was just perfect, right? It also helps that probably millennials are obsessed with like avocado toast and this kind of thing. And
yes.
So you look on Instagram, it's familiar as well. So I think it's a lot of trends coming together, and the timing before the pandemic. So I guess my question would be like, when you first started it, there was a lot of uncertainty, and you had no clue it was going to probably converge like this. What did you think was going to happen with the bakery back then?
Right. So when we looked at opening bakery, we started studying what business models work for bakeries, right? And being a place or company where we wanted to make sure that every concept we opened had integrity and soul, almost like your favorite restaurant, right? It needed to be curated to the extent. So when we looked at it as a bakery with a restaurant specialist perspective, we thought, okay, how do we make sure this bakery made sense in an experiential perspective? But at the same time, as an entrepreneur, now putting the entrepreneur hat going on, you go,
yes,
if you're going to be making breads and you're going to be making pastries, at least from our perspective and our experience working in bakeries, you needed a production space.
Correct.
And even if we didn't have that prior experience working in other places, and at least I can say that for myself and some of my cooks who then influence the type of places we open. But even just baking breads at our restaurant, and knowing that we had a dedicated kitchen just for that.
Yeah.
So if we had open Universal Bakehouse, as you say, our dining room space is really small. So conversely, if our dining room space was a lot bigger and we had a smaller kitchen space, we would have already known we were supplying to the restaurant.
Correct.
Which meant that we didn't have much left that we could bake for the community.
And I think if you think about, if you've spent time in Europe and you see the type of bakeries, it's pretty much a very small front. And actually a lot of them don't have, at least like in Portugal, from what I saw, like you only can stand. Also, I think Italy for coffee, you only can stand, right?
Yes.
So you're expected just to, point really quick, grab what you want and go, but it's all for the baking and just all the shelf space to maximize, I guess, selling all the baked goods because they produce so much, right?
Yeah, that's precisely correct. I mean, we looked at bakeries elsewhere that's not in Malaysia that were doing like artisanal sourdough breads, and we couldn't help ourselves but check these guys out and go, wait a minute, they don't even have a big dining room space, right? Yeah. Everything is production related. And when you're baking sourdough breads, they take about 24 to 48 hours. So the bread dough, when you've already reached the point where you've made the bread dough, it needs to get retarded in a lower temperature setting, like a chiller space. And then it gets ready for bagging it straight into a really hot oven just for baking. And imagine the number of breads that you have. You can't accommodate it in a small chiller in your home, or you can't even accommodate it with a 4-door chiller that most commercial kitchens will have. You literally need a walk-in chiller for this. So we told Gamma and said, if we're going to do this, we can't be half-footed about the positioning of our space. Yeah. And it was easier for us to convert our production kitchen space into a dining room than the other way around.
Yeah. But I guess the interesting question is like the reason why bakeries around the world are set up that way, because it's the nature of the customer behavior too. Wake up early, need to rush to work, quickly take this. It's more of, actually it's interesting from, hearing of the podcast, it's more of a transaction, right? Albeit though, it's a very high quality craftsmanship product that meets the transaction. So I think, it kind of meets that nice little middle space. And my question then would be, how did you know that the user behavior is going to adapt and respond? Like you didn't know that COVID was going to happen, right? So
absolutely.
Right. So how did you think that, especially for a smaller community neighborhood bakery, that, building up a big production space and a smaller retail space, that you could have that same kind of user behavior or situation?
So I think the insight we had from this was built on the 6 years of us baking breads for our restaurant and selling it in this small area in frontage, which a lot of people said, what is this? Are you selling breads? Or are you a restaurant? And for the longest time, we thought, man, we got to get rid of this like miserable bread display that we have up front of our restaurant.
But it was selling out every day, right?
Selling out every day.
Yeah.
And that was sufficient insight for us to go, all right, I think there's a market here, right? So that gave us confidence to take more calculated risks. Now, everything is a probability,
of course,
right? But we knew enough that if I had to go out and get really good quality breads at affordable pricing in the Klang Valley, in Malaysia, where would we go? There's not a lot of places that come to mind.
That's true. So what I like, what I hear and what I like is that it was, you had data, you had experimentation, and, it wasn't just a random guess, like, oh, we're good at bread and we're going to do it. There's actual proof point of actual customers buying it. So then you kind of know that there is this market. Worst case, it hopefully could break even. Then best case, and this is a very roundabout, so we're going back to the main point, right? So it's a roundabout way of saying that, you made a very interesting business decision that you didn't know was going to actually help you at a time where, I guess, what is the business lesson? Do you feel like if you open another place, do you double down on expertise or do you keep diversifying? Like, cause this was a diversification that helped because of the pandemic. It's now doing better than the restaurant just because of the situation. What is the learning, and then what do you take for the next experience? Because I'm sure you're thinking about other places already. Yeah,
if I had to think back again and say, okay, if I had a choice to make that decision, what was the real trigger point? And, when we talk about growing as a company, we think about, like you say, do we double down on specializing or do we diversify? Why can't we have both? So at that point in time, actually, we were a restaurant. We were still a fairly small restaurant team, or fairly small team, but at that point we had 20 people working in our restaurant, and about 25% of the people working with us were with us for quite some time, about 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And that's a really long time in a restaurant that's only 6 years old. So I also took it from a restaurateur's perspective or an employer's perspective that our job is to nurture and grow the people that we have in here. Yeah. And when we came up with the idea that maybe we'll just knock the space down and do a restaurant, I don't think I got a lot of people very excited.
But, that's interesting.
And that was a real key driver for me because at the end of the day, there's only so much that I myself can do as a person. And the work of running F&B, it's a contact sport. It's like there's a lot of physical, tactile work that's involved. So you need people, and they are your biggest asset. So one of the things that we thought, okay, what is it that would seem natural for us to move on and do things? And we already had a pastry and bake team that was already supporting restaurant. And for them to say, okay, wow, now we have to dedicate kitchen space just for ourselves.
It's good motivation.
It's good
exciting.
Motivation. Yeah. There's less of the, let's try and get the buy-in or start from scratch again. This is the momentum we have, right? Yeah. So let me go back to that question again. Yeah. Double down on specialization or diversification. It was a matter of getting both because we already had a pastry and bake team that was very interested in doing something more than what we had. And when we were making sourdough breads at the restaurant, we weren't actually baking it off in deck ovens, which is essentially what you would need when you're baking sourdough breads. So this was a breath of fresh air. We also had a bigger space. We had better equipment to work with. And that was very natural for me, saying, okay, that's where you can now double down on specializing. And then it was a case of, hey, actually there is diversification, especially within the community, because when the restaurant is not open in the morning, we had Universal Big House that was servicing breakfast. And when the bakery is closed at night or in the evening, we had the restaurant at night where people could come to. There was a lot of synergistic values that I saw with opening these two businesses together. So it was, that would be my answer to that question.
It's a very powerful, nuanced answer, and I think for any F&B entrepreneur, that's going to be an amazing framework to use. And I mean, you did think about it probably, but also like I think a lot of the synergies only came up after doing it. You realized that they complemented each other, right? So I guess if I'm to kind of distill your answer, like if you're thinking about expanding, right? First, you have to think the big picture. What's my captive area, right? Because F&B, unless it's not like this kind of franchise McDonald's where you kind of put it everywhere in real estate, right? You're thinking about your area that you're serving, your community, right? And you're actually solving a problem for them, right? And then you have to think about your competitive edge, right? And, what are you bringing? Are you adding value to it?
Correct.
Right? And then when you think about opening up in that same community, it's a combination of one, diversifying, but also using the synergies of kind of like making an ecosystem, right? Right. And seeing what's missing in the market to help diversify, but also using what you're very good at. In your case, it's a specialized restaurant plus a bakery. So let's do this exercise then. Let's say we're opening up a third, another shop lot opens up in Damansara Kim.
Yeah.
What would that answer be? Hypothetically, that would be, going deeper and diversifying.
Oh, we've run through that.
You've done it already. You got the answer. Okay.
It likely won't be another restaurant because I think it would be just saturating the space up.
Correct.
When we talk about adding value, it could be the case where we turn ourselves into a sandwich shop, a grocery store. We have a prep kitchen that's making fresh pasta. That seemed to me the most natural thing, especially for Tame and Apron if it was going to grow, because Tame and Apron is a neighborhood restaurant, and we've been offered countless times, hey, would you like to open in Bangsar, in Mont Kiara? Would you like to convert this into a franchise? There are many ways to grow. And I think it does come down to us to distill what kind of soul we want this place to have. So obviously we want it to make money. There's no question about that.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
It's a function of business.
Correct. Yeah. But is it sort of crafted or grown in a way that seem organic and seem that all stakeholders, not just the investors, but also the people who work in it, whether they can find meaning in it, and also to the community. Yeah. So one interesting fabric that we've understood after opening, Tame and Apron for 6 years is that restaurants are actually an enhancer of communities. They kind of build communities if done right.
Yeah, it's a place of gathering, sharing experiences, and creating memories. The heart of community, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And what's great is that community can be those who physically live around you, right? It could be a community of people who like-minded
ideas.
Like-minded ideas.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that, one of our bags, our big, hairy, audacious goals is to be able to create better restaurant experiences. And when we say that, we mean that like wine, as it ages, as a brand, as we age, we develop those roots further. So we try and go deeper into the community rather than just focus on breadth and width.
Okay. Yeah. So I see the philosophy and strategy a little bit better, right? It's this community play. Now, so say if I'm an investor, or say I'm a consumer. Well, no, not a consumer. Looking at it from a business standpoint, right? Like it's a range, right? There is transaction that needs to happen, but at the same time, there's a bit of artistry, right?
Yeah.
How do you know this idea is not being too artistic for the sake of just being artistic versus, right? Because it could be very easy to trick yourself, I'm doing this for the community and things, but are you just trying to do it for the sake of doing it, like being a hipster? And then if you risk that, right, what happens? You end up not building anything that really matters of value for the community at large.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. When we look at how we build our own business, obviously, for myself, sort of my role in the business evolving from first being a cook before all of this to, cooking in our own restaurant, and then sort of managing the business, and now sort of being more in a restaurateur position with bigger teams to manage. We start understanding that your metrics are really important.
Yes.
Right? And that if I look at it from a cook's perspective, I always think that when I try and grow the business, I'm diluting my artistry. Now,
to some extent, it's true though,
yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah. So, and that's the great thing about it is that I've been in those shoes. So every time when I speak to our chefs, our cooks, our front of house team, they're all artists at heart.
Of course,
they're not there to okay, let's buy a frozen pack of something and warm it up, and like that would be for them. It would be seen as not going against the craftsmanship of things.
And just to go on a quick tangent, which is why those types of profiles do probably very well for fine dining, right? It's purely about just that. You have your safe space, right? And someone else could help you with the business, but it's about that level of craft, and that that small percentage of people who could pay for that then makes it a viable business, right?
Yep.
But I guess what we're talking about is like yours is a different end of the spectrum where you need that element, of course, right? It's part of the soul, but you have to think about it as a business exercise and still being very ground up where it builds compounding value and connections to make something that will actually be very sticky.
Correct.
Yeah.
So my challenge in my role here in my two businesses is to find balance, right?
Yeah.
Balance in maintaining the craftsmanship of things, which is a mastery of a particular art.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not really an art. Cooking is very much more craft than an art, unless it's taken to a fine dining level.
Yeah.
And also the balance of being able to look at it as a business.
Yeah.
So one thing that helps me clarify is knowing what my personal level of ambition is for the business.
Yep.
And then communicating it just across the board to the team.
That's culture building, essentially.
It's culture building, correct. Being able to do that helps us realign a lot of that collective thoughts. And our job is not to go to our cooks and tell them, yeah, I know you want to do this thing that's a bit more craftsman-like, but actually let's think about scaling the business. It's almost seen as a dichotomy, a binary question. It's like, if I'm a craftsman, I can't scale it up. If I'm scaling it up, I have to dilute what I'm doing. So we had to find ways how to really, really balance that out. But for us, we keep ourselves in check by, as we evolve as a company from a restaurant to a restaurant plus a bakery, we started taking on the financial aspect internally to our own business. So right now we have our own, we do our own bookkeeping. It allows us to have a faster response to how our numbers look like and tells us what are the growth stages we're currently at. By having both the restaurant and bakery, as much as they're two separate business entities, we still look at it from a group level saying, okay, how are we performing as a group? Obviously, with the whole pandemic that has happened, we become a bit more defensive in terms of how we want to grow.
Yeah, correct.
But we're also setting ourselves the foundations so that we can scale culture, for instance, scale craftsmanship, which is the most difficult thing to do.
So that's why I want to ask. I think I have an idea in my head, but it's like you said, right? You if you're a chef and you want to replicate that, you start diluting your artistry and your craftsmanship. To what degree can you scale craftsmanship?
It depends. Now, craftsmanship is very dependent on individualistic competence, right?
Correct.
Especially as a chef, a lot of technical skill sets are required to be able to fundamentally cook really good things, whether it's just making something as simple as a mayonnaise or cooking pasta.
Very technical.
But there's also the whole collective part of it, how you work together as a team. So one of the things we really focus on when we talk about culture building is looking at what we do as a team sport. The closest analogy I can get myself into thinking that is like we're managing a football team, right? Yeah. Who's probably playing in the Champions League or the Premier League or whatever you call it. And to think that there are these individualistic competence that can get you to a higher level of craftsmanship. How do you...
That's a really good analogy though, sports, right?
Yeah, because, well, let's be real. Our team who works in F&B, they're all... And I would say this mostly for most people in the industry who open new businesses that are about maybe 10 years old at least, or at most. the average age is about 25, 27 tops, right? It's an athletic sport. You're standing on your feet all day.
Yeah. Very physical.
We don't find many businesses that has transitioned away from the physical. We find that most businesses have transitioned away from the physical aspect of the work, right? Let's talk about the pandemic, work from home.
Yeah.
In the pandemic, F&B businesses are actually, people are frontliners. They have to be physically at work to produce that product.
Correct.
It also shows how physical the work can be. So you're really looking at it as a sport. You've got to be an athlete. You've got to make sure you're in shape. You've got to make sure that you're always keyed in and focused. Yeah. And in a restaurant, especially when you've got a full house, a full dining room, collectively the team needs to be in sync, right? They need to have really open communication lines. There needs to, we have to break down silos. Traditional restaurants, you'd have, for some weird reason, it's front of house versus back of house.
I think this is a common across almost any industry. They'll have this kind of animosity between front and back, or whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah.
So for us, finding ways how to break down those barriers, right? And remember what the collective goal is. So that's what we kind of focus on, right? How do we get that craftsmanship for it to scale? You kind of got to take, maybe a cook has a certain competence, in how do you pull that back in so that it becomes a collective positive scaling. So
it's a very interesting element you also mentioned about it being a team sport, in that element of scaling craftsmanship. And what I like about the analogy is, like, if you think about the top athletes in the world, they just focus on doing one thing really great. And they have their one role that they have to do within a team that's really great, right? And then how does that scale? You have really great coaches, and then you have multiple teams.
Yeah.
Right? Essentially, so if you want to kind of apply that analogy to F&B, it's like, if you open up a different concept, it's the same thing. You need a really great coach. You need a really great team. Each of the individuals needs to focus on their craft. And the glue that puts it all together is culture, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So and I guess that's a way to kind of answer, your answer of how would you scale craftsmanship? And it's probably no different how, sports are a multi-billion-dollar industry. So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's my easiest way of communicating what we do to our really young team of people who work with us. It's through sports, because they all play sports at this age, most of them at least. Yeah. And it's something they identified with.
Yeah. And okay. So I guess if you take this question and then you take it even further, right? In theory, you could make another restaurant of a different flavor, or even the same flavor, but build a different team around it. And would it then dilute? It's because it's a different team though, right? And I guess that's what most famous chefs do, right? They have multiple restaurants, but they build different teams to support it.
Correct.
Right?
The only common denominator is the
founding chef.
And the fact that he's able to carry those values to the different teams.
Which is the culture aspect then. Yeah. Right? And how it should be run, and checking on it, making sure the machine is running.
Correct.
Because my other idea was like, you could, so opposite of what I was talking about is like one aspect is you replicating the same thing with a different team. So you could scale craftsmanship that way. Or, you just have a bunch of small collectives of very different artists somehow tied together. Yeah. Which is a kind of a looser kind of play, but then you have to figure out how to connect it, right? So like you're doing an artisanal bakery, maybe artisanal butchery, artisanal something else, but it's still under the same values, but different things, but small, right? So in that kind of sense, it's scaling in a different kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, in my role as a restaurateur, I think it's important to be flexible, and also pragmatic to what is possible opportunities for the growth of the business. We didn't want to silo, because this is my mental way of thinking how the business should grow. And we now have two businesses with two different business models. Yeah. We didn't want one to handicap the other. Yeah. So I think it's also being quite pragmatic about that. So for instance, for Universal Bakehouse, it's important to also remember that, we're more product centric than experiential in comparison to the restaurant. Yeah. So there's an opportunity for us to take the bakery and scale that. Yeah. Right. With already having a central kitchen allows us to do something along those lines. Whereas for the restaurant, that doesn't seem as viable because it's not as product centric. But how do we scale the experiential side, and also still keep the team engaged? Because, like you said, if we had the direction of saying that Tame and Apron would be a restaurant that would be more for scaling multiple units of the same brand, we could easily go and do that as well. But it's also knowing what kind of voice we wanted this place to grow into.
And also your team. I think you would have to probably build out another team completely because your existing team probably would have not been as excited probably to just do the same thing again.
Correct. Right?
Yeah. And it feels like you have grown a lot from kitchen table to Table and Apron. So, because a lot of your older interviews and talks were really centered around this idea of experience and feeling and, almost disdaining transactional items, like just transactional food. Because I would like to actually get into that story a little bit more, like why you were actually thinking when you switched from kitchen table to Table and Apron that you felt this need to redefine from being very, of course, hospitality driven is very important for F&B as a given, right? But, why almost obsess it, where it has to be about experience and not transactional food?
Okay, that's a great question, because when we were running, prior to be calling Table and Apron, we were running kitchen table. And then for the first 2 to 3 years, we were running it with the notion that we wanted to put hospitality first. But kitchen table. Yeah, kitchen table. Okay. Which Table and Apron still does. Yeah. But we found that there was a gap. And the gap being that whatever we preached, when it came to an action point, we didn't quite do it, right?
Very common I would say across Southeast Asia, to be honest, in the retail space. Yeah.
And we broke it down, all right? We just broke it down and said, okay, what are we doing wrong? We keep preaching these values that this is what we are. And,
But how did you know you were wrong?
We were making a loss.
There you go.
For 2 years in a row.
Proof in the pudding. So you just need to look at the numbers.
Need to look at the numbers. Yeah, so, let's not forget that if you don't want to be a hipster, you still need to look at your numbers.
Correct.
Your numbers dictate and tell you whether your theory, your experiments.
The numbers won't lie.
Yeah, numbers don't lie.
You could lie to yourself, but the numbers won't lie.
Yeah, you could go cry in your room and come and look at a spreadsheet. It still won't lie. It's still there.
Yeah, correct.
So we, when we saw that, then we knew that, okay, there was a big change that needed to happen. But it was not correct, or it wouldn't hit home if we went to the team and said, look, these are numbers. Yeah. Because our guys in the front line are like, yeah, what does that number mean to me? So we started breaking down a lot more. We started asking, okay, do you know who your regulars are?
Okay,
right?
I see.
And I still remember the first meeting we had. It was 5 of us in front of house. And there were 6 names that came up. So that means collectively, between all 5 of us, only 6 names came up.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't remember everyone else, right? We didn't connect the dots. We were also stuck between, are we a restaurant? Are we a cafe? Can we be both? Right? Can we be affordable, yet can we be a place where the food is different? Yeah. Now, we want to hit all the balls into the right parks, right?
Of course.
But we were losing a bit of focus. People would come in and say, so what kind of food do you do? Right? And when we say we do Malaysian because we were using Asian ingredients, it was very natural for them to go, so where's the chicken rice? Where's the nasi lemak? Right? Or where's the whatever you call it, which is Malaysian. And then when we said that, okay, let's try a different take. We're a Western restaurant. Where's the steak? It was a real wild ride at that time, but we started changing things bit by bit. So it was not so much a significant shift, but rather making 1% contributions on a few different things that we did as a restaurant.
Yeah, so it's an exercise of building value, an exercise of focus, which I feel like so many young and new entrepreneurs will make that mistake when building from tech to anything. Like they will try and do everything. And then of course, when you try to do everything, you don't know what you're doing and the customers don't know what value you're bringing to them. Yeah. So, and I guess what you're telling me is like, this idea of experience and why you talked about it so much back then was, you needed to focus to find what you guys actually were.
Correct. Right? And sadly for me, that took 2 years, 2 to 3 years. But
and luckily you didn't die out, because at that point I feel most people would die out, right?
Yeah. And the big thing was also making sure there was a collective purpose. So, the 3 years after we opened Kitchen Table, when we were called Table and Apron, because what actually happened, and maybe your listeners don't know, why do we keep switching between this name Kitchen Table and Table and Apron? So what happened was we made the amateur mistake of not trademarking our name called the Kitchen Table.
Ooh,
and
good business lesson there.
We were informed that that name was taken by a big hotel. So we didn't have the cash to fight it.
Such a big hotel thing to do.
Yep. And
do we want to call them out?
No, it's fine. They didn't use the name in the end.
When they still took the trademark.
But it was a good lesson for us.
That's
and
true,
actually, on hindsight, it was great because the moment the name changed, and we had to come up with the name in like a week or so. Table and Apron.
Yeah.
When the name changed, people wondered, okay, what's new about this place? Did they go bankrupt? Did management change? Right? Yeah. But that was also that transition time where we said, okay, we've got to do things a bit better. And what made a change was because, as I guess, when you're looking from an entrepreneur's perspective, sometimes scarcity is very important. Abundance could be bad for you.
It can be very bad.
Yeah.
Too much. You don't know what to do. Yeah.
When you have your back against the wall, right, and there's nothing to lose, you try all kinds of things, right? And that was when we took more risk, right?
Interesting.
But we didn't take big risks. I mean,
calculated risk.
Yeah, we took calculated risk. I mean, our biggest risk was the fact that we had to change the name anyways.
Yeah.
So I don't see how, what further risk could be bigger than that. So we started dropping off our brunch. We used to do brunch on weekends, which was great. It was contributing to at least 10% of our weekly sales. And we were like, why are we doing brunch? Why are we doing brunch? Why are we taking it out? And we realized that we were still stuck between that cafe and restaurant. People would review us and go, I love this cafe. And we're like, but we call ourselves a restaurant. Now I can't go to a guest and says, no, you've got to start calling us a restaurant. Yeah. We had to psychologically change how people perceive that experience. So we started wearing uniforms. Started wearing shirts that were a bit more consistent. Whereas before, we allowed our team to wear whatever they wanted. And with teams with very diverse backgrounds, from foreign staff to local team members, we were wearing rainbow colors. That was a hipster kind of feel that we were going for. So we changed. We kept changing. We kept adopting. And those 1% kind of like started realizing. And one of the big things we said is that we wanted to make sure that when people walked out of our restaurant, they would see us as, this is my favorite restaurant, right? Okay. Not your best restaurant, but my favorite restaurant. And I think we started seeing the fruits of those labor maybe a couple of years after we made that transition.
So from what I understand then, and what was not told in the media before was, things were not going well. And the reason why you're so obsessed with experience is because you needed it to build the value to survive and figure out what people actually wanted and to find your identity, find your soul, essentially. Right?
Yeah.
And the whole line of questioning for this was to point out that it almost felt like you were just being hipster in your interviews. You're coming across like, oh, we just want to focus on experience. And, because from a business standpoint, it does make sense. It's an exercise of creating retention and stickiness in customers because you finally understand what they want and the value you bring to them. But it sounds like it's actually beyond that. You found a core business built around that, and then you could scale it up now, and has this identity that's very clear now.
Yep.
And it's not so much that you were adverse to this idea of transactional food, right? Because essentially Universal Bakehouse has become a transactional business, and the story comes out now you're a very well-rounded, experienced entrepreneur of these varying experiences to help contribute to building even a more vibrant ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah. And my idea of adopting the analogy of a team sport really came to the fore about a couple of years ago, and how that really helped us leap ahead when it comes to saying that, okay, we want to keep this as a really great experience. We want our customers, we want our team to focus on this being a great experience. We started tying metrics together, right? So when we first started, when we went from having 5 team members going, okay, I remember 6 names, to then saying, okay, how do we remember more? We started introducing rituals where we talk about guests. during post-mortem meetings. So like a team sport, you'd have pre-service or pre-game, post-game. And within that, some of the agenda we had was talking about guests. Then we started taking our reservations a bit more seriously. So we started tracking database using their phone numbers.
Very good.
It allows us to remember guests. Why? Because if our front of house team member is not there on that day, or we had hired a new part-timer, we needed to make sure they knew who this guest was.
And then what technology are you using to track that then?
Well, back then we were just using Excel.
Yeah.
And it was just a simple case of
just type in the name and see.
Type in the name,
and then you have to read
up
quickly and know.
Yeah. The problem is our sheet got way too big for the computer.
Oh, that's good. You have a lot of customers then.
We were using the POS, which was already it wasn't the highest performance CPU out there, so it was pretty slow. But again, we embrace technology as well. We now use a CRM software called Umai, which I think most.
Oh, Umai! I know the founder, Jonas. I have to get him on the pod.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Is it good? Do you want to give good feedback? Bad feedback? Tell me what it is, so I can tell him later what he needs to fix.
When he first approached this, we thought it was bad. we thought we were probably doing a slightly better job than what he was doing it, and we thought, okay, no, we'll stick with our Excel sheet.
Yeah.
But I think he was persistent, right?
He's very persistent, this guy. Yeah.
and they came knocking on our door a year later again, saying, "Hey, okay, we're back with better features. Would you be interested?"
Yeah.
And when I kind of had a feeling that they were gonna be sticking into the game, we thought, okay, maybe it's worth considering it, even if it's just for a year. Why?
Yeah.
If it ups our game, why not?
Yeah.
Right? If it means that we have better metrics to measure rather than having that feel and me just telling our team members, hey, that person's a regular. Do you remember their name?
Yeah.
That's not so much hiring someone for competence. That's like trying to say, hey, do you have good memory or not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we wanted to avoid going down that line. So, we used Umai, which I think so far has been great. There are still things that can be improved on.
Let's name one or two.
Well, prior to the pandemic, or even after the first lockdown, we get a lot of customers that come into our place. We move our tables a lot, like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
Right? Fairly complicated. We try and extract as much turns as possible without compromising their experience. That's a real art. And the way we've gone about it is we have a template of a dining room, and our team just fills in the reservations on there, and they can visually just move it really quickly. Whereas with a lot of the softwares, the software needs to understand the back-end part of the strategy in order to accommodate to that. So that was where it was challenging. But I didn't expect Umai to be able.
I mean, that's a tough one because you're talking about how do you scale a SaaS product across vastly different customized things, and
correct
to invest in the team to build tools that can customize and then make it a good experience is very tough, but it's good feedback though.
Yeah, but I give them credit. I think they've built quite a lot of add-on features on it that I thought were quite brilliant. But
so worthwhile for your investment.
Yeah. So what it does right now is that we started using technology as well as a way to track our guests. So we're able to tier our guests right now based on the frequency of them dining in within a time frame.
Yeah.
And then we tie that kind of metric to our own front of house team as well. So they know they have to hit certain metrics.
Wow. That's quite intense because you have a 4-person office team and everyone else is working in the restaurants or bakery, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you go about implementing that and making it actually functional? I would imagine if it was me and you just give it to me, I'm just like, okay, sure. But then I wouldn't use it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. When we found out that Umai allows you to log all the guests in, and you can actually check it out on the user interface, right? Like your guest details and all.
Yeah.
And then we started nosing around. We found that we could, they allowed the clients to download the backend data. Yeah. And from there, we would extract a report for ourselves. So we just hash it out ourselves.
Okay.
And then we can see and track whether we're getting more regular guests coming in, and we kind of tier them into gold, silver, bronze. It allows us to tier them accordingly and know what we need to do with them. And also for our front of house team, they have to have some goal setting in place.
Okay.
Because let's not forget that running in F&B, the sport is repetitive, it's physical, it's long.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use the word rudimentary, but to a certain extent, it sometimes is.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, it definitely can be.
So how do you make sure that they're still using that part of the brain that is involved in decision making, complex thinking, right? Yeah. So these were some of the metrics that we used to ensure that our team was still engaged on that high level. And it's very easy to have mental fatigue when, you know, it's repetitive. I mean, I put myself in the shoes of being a waiter sometimes when I'm in the ops side, and I'd zone out. Yeah, I just stare straight in space, right? And from a manager saying, you're just zoning out. So how do you make sure that you still maintain that focus?
Yeah, and it's partially using technology from what I'm hearing. That's such an excellent point. And I talked a little bit about Renyi because like it's essentially part of the question of how do you build great hospitality, right? And it's not easy because other parts of the world, partially culture, partially education, right? They can just hire someone who can intuitively, you know, understand someone else's needs. And then if you ask a customized question, they could probably meet the expectation. But, you know, it's not as natural. I notice in Southeast Asia, you go to restaurants, you ask anything outside a rule or outside the menu, it breaks down, right? And it's partly on autopilot. And I guess you guys partially solve it by culture, partially by technology, it sounds like.
I mean, technology is there to assist. Without that culture, that collective direction, you know, technology would just be technology. There's still probably a few thousand restaurants out there using Umai. I think it's a few thousand. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But do they use it to the extent that we do, or do we even better? I don't know. But that's a good area for them.
That's a good thing, and you should probably bring it up to the next Good Food Alliance to see how they're handling it, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
but I don't know if it would apply to everyone. Maybe.
No, it really depends. So Umai is probably best if you're a full service, and you take reservations, right? But they have been trying to pivot to tap into other concepts, F&B concepts that don't rely on reservations as well. Because Umai is actually just a CRM software.
Yes, correct.
It's fronting as a reservations, but
really it's I think there's real power in that. And as a CRM software, right? So you actually segment your customers. It almost sounds like you're a technology company because this is what we would do as well, right? You would take the data, segment them. The question is now, what do you do with your segmentation? Do you have gold, silver, bronze? But what does that mean in terms of your world? For technology world, this person has not logged on and he probably wants to be reactivated. So we're sending him an email or an SMS or something, right? So what are you guys doing?
So for just Table and Apron, we run a very subtle, covert marketing style. We don't like send you an SMS that says, hey, it's your birthday, come and get 20% discount from us. And we also want to maintain let's go back to the word, the craftsmanship, that surprising element of coming to a neighborhood restaurant. So our cooks will come up with things, you know, whether it's like small bites, complimentary like small petit foods, or even maybe we've got a special dish down the pipeline, which our team constantly does R&D. That's just part of the ritual that we do here. You know, it allows our cooks to think more instinctively as chefs. So what we do is that when we identify that a guest is a tiered member, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze, they don't actually know whether they're that. They don't get a physical card saying you're a gold member of the But when they come in to dine at the restaurant, our team should instinctively know what to do, which means
to enhance the experience, essentially.
Correct. And that's a way to keep them surprised, delighted, engaged, and wanting to return. And I always tell my team, and it is a true fact, that for every single time that the guest returns back to the space, yes, it means there's loyalty, but their expectations also increase over time.
True. Yes. And then, so I guess my follow-up question would be, because the point is to understand them as a user, their preferences and behavior, so you give them a better experience, right? But essentially, you want to convert them to higher tiers as well, right? You want bronze to move to silver and silver to move to gold, right?
I mean, if we could do that, that'd be great. But I know for a fact that, and let's talk about your favorite restaurant, right? Let's say you have this restaurant that you really like. You'd visit them over the course of a particular period of time. It's hard to accept, but sometimes you find there's a better girlfriend out there and you like to go visit her, right?
This is especially apt in the F&B world, right?
Yeah. So that does change. And I think it's us accepting the fact that that life cycle of a guest visiting a restaurant is transient.
Okay, so you expect a certain lifetime value out of a customer then? Okay.
But we try to extend that.
Of course, yes.
And we try and make sure that, hey, we're still here. You can still love us because we still love you.
And an important element, and this goes for building any type of product or experience, is surprising and delighting. Like if you have a customer who gets surprised and delight, you do increase lifetime, you do increase stickiness, and at least the probability of them using your service or product again, right?
So that probably explains why, as a place at Table and Apron, where it's a lot more experiential rather than product centric, like Universal Big House.
Yeah.
Marketing strategies where like come 4 times you get a free fried chicken.
Yeah.
That kind of doesn't work.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
Rather it's more like, man, they remember my name. That's amazing, right?
Yeah,
or like they remember it was my birthday last week.
Yeah.
Something as subtle and small as that has real impact in a world where people want to feel important.
Yeah.
And I think that's what
But at the same time, a transactional business cannot be completely devoid of a soul. So how do you bring a little bit of the experience, expertise into Universal Bakehouse, which is primarily transactional driven?
Right. Okay. So that's a great point. Well, we've only been 1 year into the business and trying to find our feet operationally.
Yeah.
But one thing that the Universal Big House front of house team does was basically what the restaurant team did 3 years ago, which is talk about the guests in post-mortem. And one of the things we do as a team sport would be you build defensive plays and you build offensive plays.
Yes.
So we have offensive plays where when we see a guest and we know that guest, call them by name. It's as simple as that.
True. And you will have regulars coming in.
You would have regulars coming in. Or if you recognize that said person is a regular, but you forgot their name, give them something on the house, right? Throw in a surprise. Okay. It's less structured than the restaurant, right?
That's fair.
But we are also at a point now that because we have an online store due to the pandemic.
Ooh, a lot of data, right?
Love it. We've got data going on. But we're getting there. We're trying to see how from a product centric standpoint, we can still build customer loyalty in a way that is also experiential. And we're also learning from a lot of mostly tech companies that, I think there was one time we had the founder from Oxwhite came and did a talk.
Okay. Nice.
And I mean, we were amazed by how he would build customer loyalty. I think his name is CK. He would build customer loyalty just purely through selling shirts on an e-commerce platform.
And they raised a lot of money on crowdfunding. I think like they did a really good. I think he's really good at sales. I suspect. Yeah. And I haven't tried the product, so I can't speak to the product. But I heard they sell a lot. So and it's just plain white Oxford teas, right?
No brand.
No brand, right?
Yeah. So we're also looking at how do we take that to the next level? So I'm not so much siloed to saying that this is how we do hospitality, or this is how we provide hospitality. But what means do we have where we can ensure that hospitality is present with our guests, not just when they're dining with us, but even when they're physically apart, right? I think for the bakery, that's especially more paramount given that it's very product centric. But these are really new things for us to learn, especially from my end, where I come from a background of probably cooking from the kitchen and, evolving into this position where we're also managing different people.
Both, yeah. Essentially, you've been forced to grow as a leader over these years. And I think, right now, today, you're coming off as a very well-rounded entrepreneur, a strong leader, but that was probably coming from a place of a lot of growth and probably pain, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I would love to talk about then is the genesis of all these learnings is probably transitioning from kitchen table to Table and Apron. And you talk about very on a high level, you had a founder breakup, and I kind of want to continue this conversation from the end of Reny's episode, just difficult conversations and issues with partners. So what was exactly happening there, right? So the business wasn't doing well, and then what happened before that and what led up to it that you decided to have a partner breakup, right?
Right. Actually, that's a good point. Every time you go into business, and I still recommend that when you go into any business, don't do it by yourself. Surround yourself with great people. People keep saying that, but they don't go through the finer details of what that means. Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And that was when I went into the business, and I think that was also partly our experience of growing businesses and growing relationships with partners and even with teams. When we first started out in 2012, we started off as the Kitchen Table Supper Club. So I started with another...
a dining club, essentially.
Ex-business partner of mine, who offered tremendous value and was very much on a similar wavelength. Yeah. And it was only the two of us. And I think we really danced well together. The business did really well. But as the business grew, as more people became introduced into the business, which means
partners or employees.
Employees coming in.
Yeah.
The important thing was making sure that your first principles were clearly aligned,
which is culture and what you value, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, we really struggled with having a strong alignment on what we were doing.
Why is that?
I think that also came down to us both not having any prior experience of running businesses.
That's fair. Being young leaders, trying to figure it out on the go.
Yeah. And I don't blame our younger selves then, because I still work with 22, 23-year-old kids. And it's having a bit of patience and saying, if I was in their shoes, would I have been that stubborn? I would.
Probably, yeah.
Or probably worse, right? And I've been in those shoes before, where I would work at a restaurant and go, okay, well, I want to open my own place one day, so I'm going to learn as much as possible from you. And move on, right?
Correct.
And at that time, we didn't develop the kind of language that we should be having it when we're running a business together, right?
So it's language, and also, what about communication channels?
So that's the thing. We were running the business. So we had two key factors that I thought was culminating into either the no synergy between the partners and also poor sales. We were not focused because we were either a restaurant or a cafe / bakery, because we had sourdough breads and we had that going on. No one knew what we were trying to go for. I think we tried putting our hands in too many pots at that time. Yeah. Funnily enough, now we have a bakery and you go, wait a minute, you already have a bakery. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But when you first start a business, it's always important to make sure that there is focus.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that's been essential, because in whatever other business opportunities I've seen or been involved in the past 6 years, we've always realized it comes back to the four. Focus is so important to that. Secondly was about resilience, right? Now it's easy to be happy with your partners when things are going well, right? Yeah. But when things don't work well,
that's when the cracks start to happen.
Yeah, that's when the crack starts to happen. And having those open, honest conversations right at the get-go have been important. And I don't think we did the due diligence for that, because we were riding off really strong momentum with the supper club. We were riding off really strong momentum opening the restaurant.
Yeah. And also it's quite strong in terms of people coming when it first opened, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't have any experience. I could, like you say, in my previous interviews, we could be talking about hospitality being in the forefront, experiential services being offered to a guest being very important. But that's all just say when you don't have those action points that realize that down.
And that's what you were going through back then, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were learning everything.
Correct. So I think that culminated in a breakup, because, we were at a juncture where we had to decide where the direction of the business should be, knowing that we weren't even making money, or we were losing money, and that we had this impending trademark infringement, which was literally a nail in the coffin, right?
I mean, back then it probably felt just like probably the world's ending, right?
Yeah, but as one of my peers who runs restaurants in the US said, let's be frank, Marcus, no one really remembers the name of your restaurant.
That's true. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's very real. I mean, it's true, but tough love, I guess.
Tough love. Yeah. And that was what happened. So difficult conversations need to happen. And, even now I have a managing partner who's asked, I was excellent in operations, right?
Yeah.
And, it's also creating a culture where we are open to agree to disagree. And most of the time, even between current partners or even within your own team, are we setting a culture of, a yes man culture? Like, let's do it. Okay, boss says this, let's do it, right?
Correct.
Or are we creating a culture where we allow dissent? Not every moment, but a space where dissent is allowed.
Yeah.
That's very important because dissenting views are what gives you the edge, right? That's how innovation
you
is
avoid
driven.
tunnel vision and you could see
Correct.
different kind of risks. Yeah.
So we're a lot more deliberate now than we were before. So even within our pre-service, post-mortem meetings, we allow for dissent to happen. We allow for criticism to come in. And there's always that time for that right space and time for that to happen. I read this book recently called Leadership is Language. It's an excellent book by David
Leadership
Wong.
language.
Leadership is Language.
Liz language. Okay.
And it helps distill how your work is primarily split into blue work and red work.
Okay.
Red work being the type of repetitive task that you would do every day, whether it is brushing your teeth, driving a car, in the case of a restaurant or bakery, setting up the store, right? Blue work being the kind of work that involves more complex decision making, more collaborative,
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking doesn't depend on the time of the
strategy.
clock.
Yeah.
Red work is where it's 9 a.m. We got to open shop by 8:30 a.m. Something like that.
Go through the process. Yeah.
And it's getting our entire team aligned towards that lapse of sprints of, transitioning between red work, blue work. So that's what allows that kind of culture of openness, I think, including smiling about it.
But what if your job is primarily, red work is the operational processes?
Yeah.
What if your job is just primarily that? Like how to what degree can you get blue work in their actual day, or do we expect a burn and a churn and a rehire again?
Great. So that's where I guess leaders are supposed to be thinking how to create spaces of blue work, because, in the industrial age, you're a red worker, I'm a blue worker.
Yes,
you're the guy working on the line while I'm the guy thinking, right?
Working back in the day was exactly like that. That's how management theory developed, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because not that I was interested in it before, but I'm obliged to be interested in it now. You have to know about that now. And you realize that workers these days, they're a lot more agile in terms of their thinking, right? Let's not even talk about, millennials who grow into the business, come to workforce right now. They're just exposed to so many different experiences, and having a relevant contemporary management structure today is more important than what you would have from before. So let's take, for example, someone who's operational on the line, like our front of house captains.
Yeah.
They've got a ton of red work, but they've got to make sure they have space for blue work so they don't get fatigued by the red work or build defenses around the red work. It's almost like...
That's tough, man.
Thinking is a risk. So I'm just going to start wiping glasses and serving orders. So that's where the metrics come to the fore, right? Like things like, okay, how many tier guest growth do we have this month? Or who are they and what actions do we take? And do you give them autonomy to decide how to work in that? Then they start looking at it like a game, and they get a bit more engaged than you would in a traditional restaurant where you just be serving customers, right? I think that comes down to the leader's job. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean me, but every leader in this organization has to find a way how to mentally engage our team, who's primarily red work, especially if you're in ops. For our cooks, it's the same thing. You're cooking the same thing. Their blue work would be coming out with new specials.
Yeah, you want them to think about that too, so they aren't just stuck in this mindset too artistic, or it has to be this kind of way, right? So you got to stretch them and mold them too differently, which is essentially a challenge of leadership. And so what I'm hearing is, from your initial breakup to forming new partnerships, you were young, and I think most young founders are kind of in that kind of situation. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur and it's a long journey, you're bound to have a breakup sooner or later, probably. If ideally sooner, so you get the learnings, right? And in a sense, that kind of transformed you into what the leader you are today and everything you're talking about now, right? So what kind of advice would you give to founders on the brink of a partnership breakup?
Like it or not, be transparent, right? It's probably easier to be emotional, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got this dear baby that you've built together, that you don't want to sort of destroy. Be transparent and honest about things. Be as objective as possible.
Yeah.
And I also try and understand, for you personally as a partner, what is it that you want in this, right? Regardless of whether you have another business partner.
You got to know your end goals.
You got to know your end goals. And some of the things is, what's your personal level of contentment?
Yeah.
Right? What are you contented with? You want to open 50 stores?
Yeah.
You want to open 1 store, 2 stores? Right? Sometimes it's easy because when you talk about building a brand or building a company or building a concept, it's the most exciting thing to do. Let's talk about what we can achieve.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about what we couldn't achieve and what we failed to achieve? And I think that's the part, if you don't have the prior experience, that's the only thing that drives positivity and hope.
Yeah.
And therefore you focus on that. But when you get to the point of the brink of saying, okay, this isn't it for me, it is as much your responsibility to define what your personal level of contentment was and is, and be okay that things don't work out. That's my advice.
I guess, what you're saying is it's, and I think this is neglected on a lot of the talks and books and learnings, is being deeply introspective. You have to know yourself. And of course that comes over through experiences and learning from failings and growth and all these kind of things. But, knowing what you want, or at least thinking what you know you want, and then mapping that out should help you at least as things come up, right?
But introspection is hard to have when you're constantly running a rat race.
Yeah.
Right. So
true.
Setting time apart essentially to do that is important. And most partners struggle in that. Like even I myself, I struggle for introspection when I know that things aren't getting done. I've got other things to do, maybe setting new processes involved or having meetings with team. That gives me an idea that I'm being productive. While sitting down and just reflecting and mulling on myself in a corner seems like the most counterproductive thing to do.
It's very productive, actually. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, it's more like future-proofing, long-term will help out, right?
Yeah.
My last question about this topic then is, as you broke up, how did you know who was right and who was wrong in absolute terms? Or was there no such thing as absolute terms? And then how do you go about dealing with, your feelings if, maybe I was wrong or maybe she was right or these kind of things? Right.
Now, to answer that first question, when it comes to running hospitality businesses, I personally don't take it as a decision is absolutely right or decision is absolutely wrong. When we run businesses, we have multiple decisions to make every day. That's not even about F&B business, any business, right? Yeah. The question is the degree of whether the collective agrees to that. Okay. Right? They can support it with their actions and behavior. They don't have to necessarily say, I morally support this decision, right? It's making sure there's collective alignment. So the issue at hand isn't so much whether something was morally right or not, but more, do we collectively agree, okay, we want to move in this direction?
My only criticism to that is I kind of feel like this is the right answer in general, but there are instances in case and history and time where the collective is just wrong.
That's true.
Right? So then how do you, right? You see what I mean?
Great. I understand what you mean. So then that becomes the leader's job to be as stretchable and open as possible to ensure that we don't lead the group or the team in a groupthink position where collectively we all agree. So if I go in and sort of set up a culture where I don't take no for an answer or my way or the highway, then the organization is exposed to making mistakes on a collective level that seems wrong. So you almost have to be extremely self-aware about how you're getting teams to make decisions. And that's the hard part. You're right. That's the hard part.
And I guess if you want to do this exercise, you have to develop mental models to be aware of your cognitive bias at the end of the day, right? You got to protect against that. And the other aspect of that is you're going to get it wrong. They might come to a point in time where you built a culture or team where the collective was just wrong, and you might have to accept that and learn from it, or it could be the way around where you were just wrong and the collective was right?
Yeah.
And I guess the only way is you're going to feel that pain, unfortunately, and then hopefully you can grow from it and make it better for next time, essentially.
Yeah. So I think that answered that first question about the fact that there's not such a thing as absolutely right or wrong. Obviously, there is when it comes to moral principles.
Of course,
but when it comes to running businesses, so long as that action doesn't burn the roof down and like there's no business to operate.
Or you go back and fix it,
everything is really stretchable in that sense, right?
I think that's a really important concept to learn because you're going to meet a lot of people who are fixed, logical logicians. Like it has to be, make perfect sense. And there is this idea of right and wrong, so, but then I guess that's an exercise as a leader. How do you deal with a difficult person then, right? But
correct.
You will come across it.
Yeah.
All right. The last major topic before closing, food as an institution, right? I believe was at least, when you talked about your end goal.
Yep.
So Table and Apron, Universal Big House, the collective, the group, you want to be an institution, right?
Yep.
What does that mean?
Right. That simply means that we're in it for the long run. I mean, that really is a term for an institution, right?
Yeah.
A place that has credibility, has recognition. And we wanted, whether any idea of things that we open, it needed to be there for at least 10 years or more.
Okay,
right?
so 10 years, yeah.
It can't be that place that, okay, we're here for 2-3 years and okay, that's it, we'll close down, right? We wanted to be a part of the community. So that's why it was very deliberate for the users or listeners who don't know enough about Universal Big House. It used to be called Universal Laundry. And when you look at the frontage or the signage of the shop, it was basically exactly the old shop signage.
Yeah.
And why we took on it was not because we were trying to be hipster, although it does look like it, but because there was something about that sign or that business, which we knew like the back of our hand, that told us something, that this business was here for its community for 40 years, right? And for me, I like this romantic notion that I need to find meaning in my work.
Of course.
And when we opened this big house, what did it mean to us?
Yeah.
And what would it mean to the community? And how do we make sure that that meaning is sort of salient, like at the surface for people to understand?
Yeah.
So therefore, we chose to call it Universal Big House. We were very close to calling it, if you haven't guessed it yet, Flour and Water.
Very on the nose.
Yeah, and then we call it Universal Big
I
House.
like this. I mean, there's a history to it. There's a provenance. It's a continuation, even though it's a different line. And it fits into your whole philosophy. And I like this name better than versus Flour. I feel that it almost sounds like another bakery that's just popped up somewhere else, Yeah.
Correct.
So I think this is much better. Yeah.
Yeah. And longevity is very important. So, when I think of the word institution, I think about longevity, and it's got to be consistent with my personal goals.
Yeah.
And, as a restaurateur, our job is to raise the standards in the industry. That's why we chose to be here, right? I mean, yes, to run successful businesses, but to build future leaders.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to make sure that you're not just like opening 2 stores and like shutting it down and opening something else.
Correct.
And not building a track record for it.
I mean, I'll give you a quote here. So for the S&P 500, which is a stock index from the US, 500 large companies, essentially, with a lot of stock. Back in 1958, the average lifespan of those public companies was 61 years. Fast forward today, if you are on S&P 500, you will only be there for about 18 years now. So longevity is decreasing, right? And if you take this idea of food as an institution, or maybe a business as an institution, you have companies from Japan who've lasted centuries.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess, what do you think you need to do because I guess you mentioned 10 years, but I'm hoping multi-generational. So maybe 20, 30, 40 years, right? What do you need to do to make that happen then?
So the key word that comes to my mind is legacy, right? Man, I'm talking about legacy as if like, if I retire, it's a legacy for, I don't know, grandchildren take over. No, we don't mean it by that, but we mean legacy in terms of operational legacy, culture being a legacy that we can pass down. As we grow in size, it should be intentional, that it should be enhancing the cultural legacy of how we do things. You know, something as simple as running pre-service, post-mortem meetings, or even, you know, apart from it being a pandemic, but if it was not a pandemic, it's eating together. So our restaurant team sits down and actually eats together as well. We found that a great ritual, and making sure these rituals sort of get passed down through generations.
Keeping tradition, essentially.
Keeping traditions. When you talk about culture, that's what it is, right? Tradition, right?
Yeah.
So the more traditions you have in your company that supports towards your goal, the higher chance of it being more sustainable. So that's kind of how we're trying to look at it.
And we talked about this earlier with this idea of old world wine, new world wine. And now we're talking about tradition. And actually those old bakeries we see in Europe, all based on tradition.
Yeah.
But there's this element in the world where, because we're so global now, we're you know, ideas and foods spread faster. And what we do is we take it and adopt it to innovate. So how do you balance between disrespecting tradition, losing the cultural aspects and institution elements, to balancing growth and innovation and change?
Man, that was a rough question. I think when we talk about innovation and change, it needs to start off with a respect and understanding of tradition first.
Define respect, because people will take something and, you know, smack it around and they say, I respect it, right? You know, but the people who are looking at it, who from a traditional standpoint are like, you know, F you, you know. Right?
So a good analogy, a good example for me is when we work with our cooks, our really young cooks.
Okay.
I mean, back when we were at that age, we didn't even have Instagram yet, which is a daily part of the lives of a restaurant marketing team who's staring at IG all the time. But prior to that, you didn't have Instagram, right? So can you imagine what you knew as a cook would be whatever came from your rusty old cookbooks or whatever you're cooking in your restaurant? And you build fundamentals through an understanding of how things are done. Now it's a bit short-circuited because I can look at Instagram and go, man, I like that dish. I want to cook that dish.
And then you do it.
But you have no idea of the origins of that dish.
Okay.
You have no idea of what the traditions of it is being made.
True.
So we can really tell when a cook pushes out food that is seen as different. I won't use the word innovative yet, because if it's a dish where we try and we go, oh my gosh, this is a tasty dish. You have to understand that when we taste food, it also is about palate that's familiar to you. So if you've tried something that tastes good, but you have no idea what flavors these are, you can't identify it, chances are you won't say the word delicious. You'll say the word interesting.
Okay.
So that's when you know that you've not hit the mark. So when it comes to respecting tradition from a cookery standpoint, we look at it as how strong are your fundamentals and how do you present it in a way where it's contemporary yet familiar to people, and they go, okay, I understand that. That's different, but that's delicious. I want to have that again, right? So there's a real balance between those two.
You're walking a fine line, essentially.
Correct. And we weren't able to articulate that very well, because when we used to cook, like when I used to be in the kitchen cooking, it maybe seemed intuitive, but because I couldn't articulate it, I didn't understand what it meant. It was just like, I could do it. Why can't you do it? Right? Which was a really bad way to start in terms of leading or nurturing people. But then if it's too macro-managed, if you leave them just to their own devices, you'd get dishes that would just be floating around with like no real bearings and roots. So you always start off with saying, okay, if you're going to create a dish, what do you understand about that dish? Or what do you understand about, the background or the backstory behind it? I think narratives are really important.
And bringing that, and that has to come forward into the actual product, food. And like by seeing, smelling, and tasting, and even hearing, right? If you're familiar with the traditional aspects, it should be present and you don't feel that it's disrespectful, I guess. But that's very challenging.
So that's why, like, when it comes to us stretching our team's ability, when it comes to, say, again, case in point is cooking, right? Coming out with specials. we try and follow on the lines of something that if I was a guest coming in to dine at the restaurant, it would click to me and go, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
Right? Or, man, I feel like I've had that as a child before. And I haven't had that now. And wow, this is a contemporary way of it being done. So we work on dishes where either the ingredients are familiar to your palate, so whether it's using Japanese ingredients, or whether it's going back to nostalgia, right? Yeah. Food that you used to have as a kid, and you go, I don't see that anymore. So at Universal Big House, it was deliberate that we would just make donuts with nothing in them but just sugar coated.
Yeah.
And to our surprise, people lapped it out and go, oh my gosh, this is the best donut in the world.
Yeah.
And we're like, really? But why? Why do you think that? And it was because there was this connection that people had. So tradition is all about connection first.
Yeah.
And then pushing forward, it's about how do you build it forward.
Like a Ratatouille moment, I guess.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
We talked about with Rennie as well.
Go watch the cartoons.
You're essentially respecting through this idea of Ratatouille moment. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay, essentially. I peruse Reddit sometimes and food Reddits, and I come across videos of Gordon Ramsay demanding recipes from locals, and it seemed to anger a lot of people. I never really personally found Gordon Ramsay offensive, and I kind of liked his short YouTube videos. Is he disrespecting the food world? On one end, that's one camp, right? Or is he just really just doing his thing and being respectful and modern about it?
I think it's in the context of him engaging with an audience that would laugh at the action of it. I don't personally think it is a case of
him trying to appropriate and be disrespectful,
correct.
right?
Yeah. I mean, that's his persona on TV all the time, right?
Yeah.
He go on and like swear at people, and it's great for TV. Yeah. But in a real professional kitchen, that actually did exist in the 1990s. Doesn't exist anymore. And it's not relevant in today's workplace, at least in my opinion, from what I've observed. Even like chefs that, I admire and know about, and what gave me the inspiration to say, I want to be in the restaurant industry. They've evolved together with the times, right? And, to be relevant with, different generations of cooks, that's kind of what has to happen as well.
So you don't mind if people going around taking recipes and then just adopting it for the sake of media?
And that's a good thing. I disagree with it if I would have to do it, but I think because let's say Gordon has that clout, right?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
And I mean, he's leveraging it to engage with his audience, and those peripheral audiences that maybe don't engage with him may tend to disagree, which rightly so.
I see what you mean. Okay, yeah.
That's
a way of putting it.
For me, that's how I would.
Yeah. I mean, it's neither like necessarily wrong or right, I guess. It's just how it is, right?
Correct. But let's be real too. You could give a single recipe to all our cooks, and you laugh at how one person would do it, and then you'd be admiring, wow, this person really does it differently, right?
True.
And a lot of the cooks who are probably doing it are just doing it for fun, for the fun of it. I think it's also knowing what the intention is about.
So let's flip this conception of institution, food as an institution. I've talked about long-lasting businesses and companies. Is McDonald's an institution?
Yeah, I'd say so.
You'd say so? And what other institutions do you think about for food that you would look up to then?
I would look up to businesses that have been around a long time, and it could stretch as far as the chicken rice hawker stall down the road. So even like a hawker stall could be an institution. Yeah. Anything that engages its audience. It doesn't necessarily mean that we either like that kind of food or what, but the concept itself resonates with part of the community and constantly builds on that.
But does the institution have to include the physicality of the hawker, the person, and the food? Because it feels like almost the dishes are an institution in Asia. Right?
Yes.
People will specialize in that, and people go around to those one shops, even though there's multiple shops, but it's like a dish is an institution.
I'd say that people behind it are what drives the
institution. So you would, to make an institution, you need the people.
Yeah. I think narratives are really important, right? If you like a place just because of the dish, that means you just like the food, right?
Yeah.
And over time, maybe dining there gives you special memories. And I think that's something that McDonald's does a really great job at.
They get you when you're young.
They get at you when you're young with those Happy Meals. And that's where you go celebrate as a kid with your friends, right?
Which is very interesting.
At the time.
Yeah, because, well, it's actually a very modern thing because the first McDonald's from Malaysia opened in 1982, 85 or something like this. So it's only kind of our generation who kind of grew up with that. At least for in America, it was there longer. So I mean, for me, of course, it was a given. It was always there. But it means just for the Malaysian generation we see now, it actually has become an institution in a more modern sense, I guess.
Correct. Yeah. Now, how the current generation, let's say, okay, if it was my daughter's first time at McDonald's, I don't know how that would inform her as, okay, this is a great institution to come to, right? But
it's forming the memories, like you said.
Forming memories, right? So the institution that forms memory the best is the one that kind of wins in terms of longevity.
Okay. All right. So I want to go to the closing few questions. Recently on episode 12, I had a conglomerate and they're starting this new concept of a food accelerator, kind of like a tech accelerator where they help new restaurants, kind of get started. What are your thoughts around that? Because when you started, you had nothing. You just maybe had a few friends who were also on the same journey. Would you recommend people to kind of search out accelerators now, or do you think people should be doing it themselves?
I think accelerator is a good thing so long as there's a culture of support that goes into it. Yeah. When we first opened shop, Renee from Burger Lab was the one who sort of found and say, hey, we have to have this thing called Good Food Alliance. Yes. At that time, I thought, I was like, what on earth is this? But actually, you know, on hindsight, it's brilliant because let's imagine 6 years ago when we opened shop and we're like, oh, damn, we've got some plumbing issues. Who do we call? Let's call Mr. Tan. His name is on the tree over there. It says plumbing, right? So let's just give him a call. Yeah. And this was only just 6 years ago when this happened.
Correct.
The restaurant industry was operating in a very fragmented territorial way as compared to what you have right now, where, you know, we have the ability to sort of connect with peers within the industry on the same level. So we could talk about sales, we could talk about HR issues. And just to have, we go back, that community is so integral to how we do things. So if the accelerator program provides that kind of community right at the upfront, then I'd say there's more wins than losses. Yeah,
essentially it has to broadly serve a greater purpose other than unto itself. Yeah. And then it would kind of make sense. You would kind of recommend it because it does grow the scene, adds more resources, and trains people, accelerates people to be on the same level to hopefully get a more vibrant F&B scene.
Correct.
Okay. Do you mentor other food entrepreneurs? What is that like?
Wow. I don't know. I don't know whether the word is, do we directly mentor food entrepreneurs? But every time a new recruit joins our company, I look at them straight in the face and say, what's your ambition? Or like, what are you aspiring to? Those who come and work with us, a high degree of them actually say they want to open their own restaurants.
Of course.
So we go, great. And I just stated up front, looks like you could either be a future business partner or you could be going on to open your own place.
Nice. Okay.
And our job here is to make sure that you learn from this experience that you have with us and that you wrestle through with resilience and learn about how to up your game and working in a team sport so that when you open your own place, you know the dynamics of it all. We've been fortunate because actually in the 6 years that we've opened, I think we've had like 3 or 4 restaurants come out from cooks who've worked at us, with us. And I'm hoping that's because we've indirectly nurtured them because we do mentor as much as we can through our leads, everyone who works in this place and to at least give meaning to that. So we're quite happy that, you know, we have more options of other places to dine out. But we're not in any official program where like we mentor.
But you're doing it every day as a leader, as your job, and for your companies in the group, essentially.
I think that's an obligation.
Yeah. And I guess that's an interesting point that, you know, someone new coming in says you can be a potential business partner. And here's a concept from the tech world. They create a little stock option pool for the employees. Because they can't pay them salary, actually. But that aligns them further. Have you considered building stock option, make them actual official partners in a small capacity, less than 1%, even 1% if they're really good?
We have thought about things like that. We haven't reached that kind of stage yet because a lot of the young people who join us who aspire to open their own place technically could go and open their place tomorrow if they wanted to. The opening a restaurant or any F&B concept in Malaysia, the barriers of entry is extremely low.
Yes.
It's not like you're in New York in the CBD area where if you had to open a place, you have to sign a lease for 10 years and then you've got to get a VC behind your back to support this. In Malaysia, I could have 100 grand, go and open that place up. So stock options don't seem as viable here, or it doesn't seem to me as attractive here. Unless we've built so much credibility that you'd be second guessing why you're opening a place yourself.
Well, let me flip the conception on its head, because what you can do is keep an open mind. You give them a very small amount, but you make them get it over a longer period of time, 4 years, 5 years. And if they do open own their own business, you get something out of it too. Maybe you get a stake in theirs.
Correct.
Right. So if you could think of it that way, it helps grow the ecosystem, promotes entrepreneurship, and maybe more future entrepreneurs in the space.
Exactly. And I mean, Asia's our managing partner here. Probably went down that route, so she's got a chunk of share there. She's now co-founder of
the Universal Big House
bakery, and I'm open to however she wants to run and grow the company and
very good.
Eat more, a bigger slice of the pie. Go ahead, right?
Yeah, as long as the value is increasing, everyone gets more, right?
And that's how we should be looking at it. So I think the opportunity is definitely there. And for a lot of young people out there, on your listeners, if they happen to be, I want to open a restaurant, or I want to be a cook and I want to, one day run my place, I think it's important for them to also know that, okay, there's definitely an opportunity that, in fact, if you don't realize it, the fastest way to becoming a business owner is actually in hospitality. The fastest way of management is in hospitality. You take 2 years and you're in management, or you're managing people. Right? Whereas in a lot of the other industries where
a long time.
technical competence is of a much higher level, you don't jump straight into there.
You're talking something like engineering, doctors.
My wife is a doctor. And half the time I don't know what she's saying technically with her work. And whatever we do seems extremely trivial compared to that on a day-to-day basis. But that's that, technical expertise to a certain level makes it harder to go into management. And in F&B,
it's much easier. And it's a great way for a young person to get actual leadership experience faster, which I think is just very critical to have that exposure. So you have different viewpoints and know how to develop your career.
It's because it's very much a people business, right? You work with multiple personalities with a variety of background. At Table and Apron Universal Big House, 40% of our staff are foreign and from 6 different countries, and that alone tells you how diverse the team is. And if you're going to learn management, and when we talk about management, we're talking about managing people essentially. We're not talking about managing projects or whatever. That this is the real school for it.
It's true. So you've developed as a leader. Where are you? What is next on your entrepreneurial journey?
Wow. I think for me, the important point is that we are able to create vertical career paths for our team over here. As much as I like to say the easiest answer is, I would just want to grow and go at third store next year, stuff like that. But you can't grow unless you have the leads in place.
The right foundation.
So much of my journey now as a restaurateur is also focused on the internal team and figure out ways how to actually build them up as leaders. Also to make sure that we create a space that's credible for talent to come in and say, okay, I want to have a career in the restaurant industry. I mean, right now, parents are probably more open to their children saying, I want to pursue a career in culinary arts or management or hospitality.
You think so? Is that what you're seeing?
I'm seeing a lot more, at least with the applicants. They're like, my parents are like wholly supportive.
Really?
I'm like, really? Wow, that's pretty good.
The world's changing. We're getting old.
Whereas, 10 years ago, 12 years, 15 years ago.
No. Doctor, engineer.
Correct.
So. Okay. So really focusing on the people. of course, on the horizon, there's always opportunities you're exploring. And it's very clear from our conversations, you've already thought about these things. But, I think it's like you said, getting the right foundation, making sure that the restaurant can continue pushing through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I guess, as the opportunities come up, it sounds like you'll be you're ready for it.
I hope we are, and the team is.
So for my last question, in your opinion, do you think, having the heart, and really wanting to do it and experience is enough, or do you need more?
Well, I think that's a central part of why you do what you do. That's almost like your North Star. So you got to have that. But is it strong enough that it helps build resilience? And I think that's the most important thing, because you may be passionate about it, but when things go south, are you still passionate about it?
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's also not looking at it as either you're passionate or not. That's very black and white.
Yes.
Right. But it's looking at how much of a desire or hunger do you have for it that makes you want to push through. I think that this kind of direction applies for all entrepreneurs out there.
Yes.
Right. Everyone's seeking to push that ceiling of growth, because at every single part of your growth stage in your company, you're going to reach that ceiling. It's always a step up. And it's figuring how much your appetite is, and that's why your level of ambition. So I think to just say to have the heart and passion for it, and is only talks about one aspect of it. It's learning how to build that grit to overcome challenges, learning how to have the stamina, the tenacity, say, okay, this is what we want to go for, and no matter what happens, right, how do you adapt and find ways to grow towards that? And that the challenge is, as you keep stepping up, your team gets bigger, and it's easy if it's just you, but when you have a team, then your role as a leader comes into how do you inspire them, how do you motivate them?
Yes. Perfect. All right. I think we've learned a lot today. Completely went off script, but we covered almost everything I wanted to talk about. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Alex.
It was a pleasure.
Welcome.
Hey, listeners. Thank you for listening to another episode of EOA. As usual, if you found this episode insightful or valuable, please share it to your friends and family. Let us know your feedback at entrepreneursofasia.com/podcasts. I'm not sure how to close here. Marcus and I discussed many topics that perhaps would point every aspiring and current entrepreneur to see how Marcus thinks about his business, the ecosystem, personally and introspectively, the community at large, and the value it creates when combined. Holistically, there's a powerful framework in between the lines born of hardship and love. I believe any entrepreneur would appreciate what Marcus had to share. Thank you to the listeners for your continued support and listens. It means the world to me. I look back to seeing you here for next week's episode. Until next time.